You're listening to the Veterinary Innovation Podcast.
You're listening to the Veterinary Innovation Podcast. My name is Shawn Wilkie, and along with my awesome co-host, we interview the innovators in this space every week. Ivan, please go ahead and introduce today's guest.
Hey, I'm Ivan Zach. I'm really excited to introduce today's guest, Piers Dargan. Pierce is a founder of Equine MediRecords, the first company given regulatory approval to digitize the veterinary compliance documentation for racehorses in 2016. In 2018, EMR launched its first software platform in Ireland and has since expanded globally into markets such as the UK, France, USA, Saudi Arabia, and Hong Kong, working with some of the largest names in the equine industry. Equine MediRecord received a multi-million dollar investment at the end of 2022 to join their Business Infusion Group, the largest equine veterinary software group in the world. Pierce, welcome to the show. Thank you for finding the time.
Thank you for having me.
So let's dig in. This is an area of not my expertise, so I'll be educated. Can you start with what problem are you solving for the industry? What is it that you're doing, and what problem is solved with your innovation?
Sure. So back in around 2016 in Ireland anyway, but it was a trend that's been happening across the world. There was a lot more regulations introduced around owning a horse and a racehorse specifically, and a lot of those pertain to the veterinary records you have to keep. So anytime in Ireland or throughout the European Union now that you give a medication to a horse, that has to be recorded. And previous to us, that was recorded in a big paper book. Now, the problem with that, I grew up on the farm, and this is how I came up with the issue. It was the problem that I was having myself while I was trying to keep on top of these records, was that a lot of the time the book can get lost. You're on a farm, it gets dirty, it gets wet. You can be away from the farm when the vet is administering something to the horse. So when you come back, you can forget or you lose the book. So it really was an insufficient system. And it's something where if you got it wrong, you were really worried about the consequences, because you could get fined. And in the worst case, you could lose your license to actually own horses. So I went to the regulators in 2016 and I said, look, if I raise money to build a digital system, would you approve this as a regulatory document? So have this instead of the paper version. And it took 2 years. What I didn't know at the time was no country had digitized horse records yet, which was something I didn't realize until starting the company. And so it took around 2 years because it hadn't been done. We got approved in Ireland, then went to the UK, got approved by the British Horse Racing Authority, into France, then to the United States, first in Kentucky and California, and then Saudi Arabia, and most recently in Hong Kong. So that's kind of what we do. It's basically having a system that if you own a racehorse or a sport horse, or in certain jurisdictions just a horse, that as an owner, a trainer, or a vet, that, okay, these are the regulations I have to comply by when I give a medication to this horse. And the platform just gives you that peace of mind. That's where you keep it.
No, that's a very good answer, and it stole my next question, but I've made up a new one really, really quickly, Pierce. So the question I have is, there's a bunch of pieces of the technology in the equine industry. One of those is a practice management system or an EHR. It sounds like you're not that. So what are you, and how do you work with those? And maybe talk about this investment slash partial acquisition and what that means to your organization.
Yeah, so we are compliance regulatory software. So we are not a PIM system. So that is not our job. Our job is that essentially, depending on if a horse is competing in a sport, if it's traveling somewhere, so certain countries take it for what we do with Saudi Arabia and Hong Kong, or just the day-to-day regulations that occur in certain jurisdictions having a horse, there is paperwork required when you give medications to horses. And so that was literally paperwork in a big book. What we've come in and gone and said, look, it's the digital world. There's so many inefficiencies with keeping paperwork, which I just said, especially in a farm setting. And people are really worried. A lot of the people who have to keep these records are not veterinary trained. And so they're really worried, gosh, if I get this wrong, I can get in big trouble. So we wanted to build a system that was really easy to use and go, don't worry, if you give something to your horse, You log into your system, you select the horse, you say, yes, I've given the medication. And depending on the jurisdiction you're in, the type of horse you have, or depending on where the horse is competing or traveling, the system will tell you, oh, this is what you need to record. This is the information. So now in terms of then talking about, okay, how does this link us in to the practice management systems for vets? Well, a lot of this information is actually done by vets and recorded by vets in their own systems to invoice, whether it's the trainer or the owner, whoever it may be, the farm owner. So what we've started to do with our new group, which we joined, called Business Infusions, which is the largest equine veterinary software group in the world, is to link our system to those veterinary systems. So if I'm a vet, rather than having to go to that owner, trainer, farm owner and say, this is the medication I gave your horse, these are the required data points you've got to put in to the Equine MediRecord system or your book, if they still keep the paper, they can literally go, if the client has Equine MediRecord now, they go, don't worry about it. When I send the invoice, it's going to push into your system. You don't even need to worry about it. All you need to do now is approve it. So it's basically cutting down the work that needs to be done by 50%. And it's making the industry more efficient. Because the amount of times I've heard from vets that they get phone calls from trainers or owners or, riders going, sorry, I was out, I was with another horse somewhere else. What did you do to my horse? What medication did you give? Even just from a good governance perspective for that owner. And the vet is getting bombarded with these phone calls and questions. It just gets rid of all that now because it's just easy. The owner, the trainer, the vet, the rider knows, okay, I don't need to worry about it because the vet's going to push it over because they use Capital Equine or HVMS and it's going to push into my EMR. So that's just making it more streamlined and efficient for everybody.
So it sounds like to me you found a very obvious problem that nobody had fixed for a very, very long time. So that's pretty innovative. Good job. My next question is, how's it going? How since 2016 you started? Looks like a multi-million-dollar round last year. How many horses are there in the world, and how many are in your system? And how's the growth rate going?
Yeah. So now, as of 3 days ago, it's now 2 years ago because it was the the end of 2022. Now we're in 24. But look, it's going very well. I'll be honest. As you said, it was something that was quite difficult to get over the line because it hadn't been done before. And the equine industry is a very conservative industry. It's made up of people who have done this. Not only have they done it, but their parents did it before them and their grandparents did it before them. Like my grandfather was in the industry, our farm came from my grandfather. And so a lot of the time it was, well, it's worked for a couple hundred years. Why change it? Why change it? Paper's fine. And my argument was always, we're not 300 years ago anymore. People want to see that you are doing everything in your power to do whatever you can and the best you can for your horse, for your animal. And so there are new regulations. That is the world we live in. And you will have to comply with them because if you don't, we've already seen what's happened and you get in trouble. And so I won't lie, it took a while to get that buy-in. But we really, I think, and this is an interesting thing, I think we saw a lot of traction post-COVID because people adopted technology, whereas they were a bit scared before. I feel like everyone in the industry was forced to go onto technology for doing their COVID reporting. They were forced if they wanted to speak to their grandchildren, they have to now go on Zoom. So many people moved on. So we've really expanded now across globally. We got our first contract in Saudi Arabia with the Jockey Club of Saudi Arabia, which was big for us. We did our first contract now in Hong Kong just a couple of weeks ago. So we're starting to see that traction, and it's really helped joining Business Infusions as well because they have clients all over the world. The largest equine hospital, Haggart is the largest one in the US, is a client. Newmarket Equine Hospital, Dubai, Qatar, Saudi, Scone in Australia. So it's really helped us to expand as well. And as I said, a lot of the data that we need for compliance is recorded in their systems for their own management by the vets. So it's been a great partnership, and we're very thankful for our Business Infusion colleagues.
It's very interesting. Any business model that is facilitating any form of compliance is really strong, because once you get into the field of compliance, even though it's so hard to get through the regulatory bodies and prove that that you're the sort of staple of the compliance in a particular industry, but once you get into that position, it's really hard to for competitors to enter that. And honestly, a lot of the times nobody even thinks about that because there is now a standard how it's done. So congratulations on a very cool business model. What, as you're talking about this, what's weird to me, and I've come from small animal, companion animal world, is that it's not weird to record a record in the medical record when you give medication to a pet. We have to do it every time. But I know that it's kind of a different flow in the equine and especially in large animal. If you go further into like farming and stuff, forget about the records. They forget that they visited a farm and not even like what medication. So I've seen that world. But I understand where particular industry is at. I have a weird question. You're from Ireland, right? Originally yourself?
Yeah.
So I heard statistics that Irish accent is the best accent for salespeople because they close, if you compare statistically, most of the deals. Do you know that you have the competitive advantage based on your upbringing?
I didn't know it was the accent. I do make jokes saying there's always an Irish person somewhere. So we always found, like, when we started expanding globally, Irish people just would pop up out of places where you didn't expect Irish people to be. And so that's kind of helpful. I just think because of the history of Ireland, we were forced to emigrate, up until quite recently, just because there weren't jobs in Ireland until kind of the 1990s. My own father had to emigrate out of Ireland. I'm kind of the first generation, of my family to stay here. My two older brothers emigrated. So it's, I guess, a little bit of a handy network. There seems to be an Irish person somewhere. You just have to try and dig. And a lot of the time it will be, oh, you're Irish? Oh, well, so-and-so in our office is Irish, or so-and-so in the other office is Irish. So yeah, it does help. And I like to think Ireland has quite a good brand, if we call that a brand globally. People seem to, on the whole, have a positive outlook on Ireland. And I think that was even in the equine space particularly. I think it really helped we were from Ireland because, we're a small market. There's only 5 million people in Ireland and a couple 100,000 horses in Ireland, but we punch above our weight. The most winningest thoroughbred racehorse trainer is Irish, Aidan O'Brien, here in Ireland. Our Olympic team in the equestrian sports have won medals in the past. They always compete in the Olympics. They're always up there as one of the favorites, one of the ones to look at. We sell our horses all over the world, whether that's in racing with thoroughbred, whether that's with sport horses. There's an Irish sport horse breed. So I feel like if we had come in and did, a payment solution, and we were going around the world into Hong Kong and everyone, they go, why are we an Irish company? But because we're in the equine space, we're kind of known for horses. They went, oh yeah, this is being done by an Irish company. Yeah, that makes sense. So it has helped. It really has helped because we do have that brand when it comes to horses.
Pierce, so where are you going next? What's the big, bold vision for your organization? What's the company look like in 5 years?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing for us right now is to try and expand into areas where the system is part of the regulatory framework. And so just to give an example of this in a couple of different scenarios. So if you have a purebred Arabian horse, so it's a type of breed of horse, racing in the UK, by law, you have to use our system to keep the medical records. So it isn't even now a decision for people to do it. It's literally by law because they wanted to be the best when it came to equine welfare and transparency and traceability. So like that's what they've done in the UK for purebred Arabian racing. When a horse goes to travel to compete in the Saudi Cup, which is the most lucrative horse race in the world, I think it's $20 million. You can look at it. I think it's $20 million for one horse race. By law, you have to use our system if your horse travels to go and compete in that race. And the local Saudi horses have to use our system to compete in that race for equine welfare as well as anti-doping protocols. So I think for us, it's going from a system that is nice to have, where a lot of the people who are the model farmers, as I like to call them, model horse owners, that they use the system because they want to stay on top of compliance, to being the compliance system. So that's kind of the goal. And to look at that not only from a breed perspective, so for certain horses, but also on a countrywide and transportation perspective. So that's kind of the goal. And we're seeing that at the moment. And I think the biggest thing was for us, we had to prove that the system was durable. We had to show that it was going to work. But now we've been live for, gosh, it's 6 years. 6 years goes quickly, and we've had no issues. We've worked in the biggest kind of organizations, equine organizations in the world. We've done, I think it's like 4 Breeders' Cup World Championships. So that's like the World Cup of thoroughbred horse racing, horses all over the world, millions of dollars in prize money. And we've basically, you've had to use we've been partnered with them, no issues, partnered with Saudi Cup, no issues. So, and the British Horse Racing Authority as well. So I think that's the goal, is to kind of get that mass adoption, is the aim.
Super cool. So 6 years is quite a long time in a technology company. It's pretty interesting, and it seems like you guys are off to the next evolution of the company, which is really cool. It looks like there's Pierce is going to be around for a while, here, according to the conversation that we're having. But the question I want to kind of drive you towards is kind of like an industry issue that we talked a lot about in the small animal world, which is just kind of the standardization of these medical records and this digital information. And it seems like you're kind of in a very unique spot because of the regulatory component of your business, working with practice management systems. There's a bunch of them out there. You're now partnered with the biggest one in the equine industry. But what's happening with this kind of data standardization when it comes to equine medicine? And where do you think it's going to end? Is it going to be a good place, or is it going to be like small animal where it's still a bit like the Wild West?
Oh, what a question. So I'll take this in an American context, because this is something that's really come to the fore in equine veterinary practice in America, because there is a new now federal agency for the first time called the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Authority. So that is now, previous to that authority, there was no standardization. It was done state by state. So you literally would go to Kentucky to race a horse, and the rules in Kentucky would be different from the rules in California, would be different from the rules in New York, would be different from the rules in Florida, would be different. And so no one in the industry, and I think it's fair to say no one in the industry enjoyed that situation. Now, the big thing, as you say, is there is now a debate around, okay, I would like to say that most people agree it's got to standardize, because it's just so complex, because especially with horses, more so than small animals, they move all over the place. So a horse will race in New York, then race in Florida, then race in Kentucky and California. And if you were a trainer or a vet trying to keep on top of all those different protocols, it was a bloody nightmare. So this new federal agency has been set up. There is a big debate in terms of how do you standardize those protocols around the different states, which are the best protocols, what should be looked as the model kind of states to do that, what is the best format, what data should you require, how should you require it, and it's got really quite tense. This is public knowledge. The agency is currently under a number of lawsuits from various states. So I think it's not controversial to say that some people are not happy with how it's being standardized. But how that resolves itself, that is a great, question. I'd be very hopeful it will, and that they bring the stakeholders together to agree some sort of standardization, because it's not good to see the industry fighting itself right now, which is what's happening. But I to be honest with you, I think it's fair. I don't know. And most of the people I've spoken to, most of the vets I've spoken to, most of the people, the regulators within the industry I've spoken to, they haven't been able to give me an answer either. So if you find somebody who can give you an answer, I'd be very interested if you could relay that back to me.
I offer you Ivan. Go ahead, Ivan.
Well, I have before we wrap up and we're getting to the end here, I have another weird question for you. So equine industry, there's so much money in it. It's a very much entertainment, and it's a competitive, and it's a luxury industry in many ways. So were you ever approached by anybody super rich to alter the records? And you don't have to answer whether you were or you were not, and whether you did it or not, but just to try to change the records because this is a compliance instrument by some, or maybe prince from Saudi Arabia or something like that.
Well, the good news is I couldn't, even if I wanted to, or even if I was approached, because on our system there's a thing that closes treatment. So the regulators, what they can do is go in and close treatment, and what that does is lock it off, so you can't edit it. So it basically means that for the integrity, basically when they deem a horse to be eligible, or if they deem a horse, or if the person closed off a treatment, it basically ensures that integrity of the record. It's uneditable, and so it just is timestamped as of this time, this cannot be changed. Or if they see it with a horse coming in to compete, and the authority goes, this is being checked off eligible, it closes that record, and it basically means a part that record is saved. It's uneditable. No matter how much money I'm asking, I can't do anything. So, for that very reason, because that question was what was asked by regulators, not in that way, not in that context, but in terms of if someone so wished to edit the record, could they? And the answer is they can't. Once the regulator looks at it, deems that record to be compliant, that horse to be compliant, and they close that treatment record, that's then saved with them, and it can't be edited. So it means it's not my responsibility anymore. So, which is great.
Not a part of
yeah. So, but no, it's a very valid question, because it was something that we, how it took 2 years to get through the kind of how the system would be set up. It was questions like that. And it was one of the first ones I can remember very vividly. The Irish regulators were going, how can you ensure the integrity of the record? And I went and I basically outlined what I just said. It took a couple of months to try and figure out how it would work, but that's what we came to. And that's been accepted as a standard going forward. And it's better than paper, because guess what? If someone gets in trouble and then they go, oh, my paper record's back on my farm, you have no idea if they wrote that paper record, called up someone in the farm and went, hey, go write down X, Y, and Z in the paper record. They're coming. You can't tell. It doesn't have a timestamp, whereas beautifully our system is timestamped. So when the record's been added. So that's kind of how we ensure the integrity of records. And it's why it's better than the paper, and why regulators like it. But also it proves innocence of the people. That's a big point that I say for training, because if you're being innocent, because some horses have biological variants where for some weird reason, phenylbutazone will stay in one horse a couple of hours or days longer than another. You race when it's supposed to be okay, you have a positive test. If you have our system and it shows the timestamp, hey, look, I put phenylbutazone in, it was 3 days ago, it said 3 days ago, this is a freaky horse, for some reason, it still has it in its system, it's a tiny minute of it, you now have evidence to present. Whereas if you have nothing, or paper, that's not evidence, because they're like, well, you could have wrote that today, or, you don't have any record, and there's nothing to kind of back your claims.
You're super fascinating, really cool company, really neat innovation. Thanks for joining us. We like to wrap up the same way every time. I got a couple questions for you. First is a YouTube video, a TED Talk, a book, something you found inspiring along your journey building this cool company.
Oh, inspiring. I think it was definitely, so I started my business just out of college. So there was a company over here in Ireland where it was founded by another young entrepreneur. It's called Strong Roots. So that was then, it's a healthy food business. And the guy just started it, by himself, kind of making the stuff himself. He then sold that, I think, to McCain. I think he sold a stake of it for something like $80 million. And I kind of went, wow. So if he can build that out of nothing at a young age, I can do what I want to do. Because a lot of the time, if you're a young entrepreneur, the first thing you get asked when you try and raise money is, what's your track record? And you're kind of going, I'm young, I don't have any track record. How am I supposed to have a track record? This is my first thing I've done. So it was quite disheartening. And when the news about that came, and I saw that news that he was able to do it, I was like, okay, there must be a way of getting around this. So I think that's kind of the inspiration I took to keep going.
Awesome. And the second question that we ask is, there someone in the industry that you think would be a good guest for this podcast?
There's a company called EventLog, and what they're doing is really kind of cool and unique in terms of kind of the veterinary when it comes from anti-doping protocols. So like the tracing that they're able to do of blood samples, then going into the labs, being able to trace that all the way from the racetrack QR code that traces remote. They're able to see that hasn't been tampered with, goes into the machine. It's able to send an automatic positive or negative in the sample and go, like, that has revolutionized anti-doping, and credibility that anti-doping is taken seriously in equestrian sport or in horse racing. And they work with the United States Equestrian Federation. They work with the British Horse Racing Authority. They work down in Australia with a number of the state agencies down there. They're global. And what they did to really revolutionize anti-doping is a really cool story. So Mike would probably be my choice.
Thank you so much for listening to the Veterinary Innovation Podcast. If you want to hear about our new episodes, please follow us on any social media channel. Also, you can check out our website at veterinaryinnovationpodcast.com. See you next week.